The radio's hiss came first, faint and broken, like a dying breath exhaled through static. Then came the voice. It stuttered through the dark forest, riding on a signal that should not exist. The ranger tower had been dead since the late 90s, the wires gnawed to bone by weather and time, yet the speaker glowed green with life. Every frequency bled into one low pulse, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Outside, fog pressed against the glass and pine shadows shifted as though something unseen wandered the clearing. The voice repeated the same call sign, slow and deliberate. No one recognized it, but the words were recorded on tape 27 years ago. The last transmission before the ranger vanished. The static deepened, and through its hum came a whisper, calling out to someone standing in the dark. Morning broke weakly, spilling pale light over the forest's soaked ground. The investigators found the cabin door ajar, though Kyle swore he had locked it before dawn. Inside, boot prints marked the floorboards. Old, narrow treads, leading toward the radio and vanishing at the wall. The device was silent now, but a faint warmth lingered in its metal casing. Clara pressed her palm against it and flinched. Something deep within still pulsed. The air felt thick, heavier than before, carrying the scent of rust and wet pine. From the woods came the slow creak of something swinging, rhythmically, like a sign swaying though no wind stirred. The sound of the swinging came from behind the cabin, beyond the tree line. They followed it, each step muffled by damp earth. The forest was too still. Even the birds refused to speak. The noise grew sharper, a chain against metal. They reached the old watch platform where the tower's ladder rose into mist. There, hanging from a nail, was a ranger's badge, clean, untouched by age. The initials engraved on it matched the name from the old file, but when Kyle lifted it to the light, the metal was warm, as if freshly worn. From the canopy above came a single, hollow echo. The sound of a radio click. They set up their equipment before nightfall. Audio recorders, cameras, motion sensors, all flickering with small green lights in the dark. The forest seemed to close in around them, the air growing colder as the sun bled out. The radio remained silent until midnight. Then, the same code burst through, louder than before, accompanied by a whispering voice. It wasn't words this time, more like breathing, layered over the signal. Clara leaned closer, hearing something beneath it, the faint hum of another voice trying to form a sentence. The signal repeated once more, and this time, the static seemed to say her name. Rain began to fall hard, tapping the metal roof like slow, deliberate knocks. The lights dimmed as the generator sputtered. Kyle moved to restart it, but Clara froze, eyes fixed on the fog outside. A figure stood near the tower, faint and still, head tilted toward the cabin. The red beacon overhead flashed, and in that split second, the figure was gone. Then the radio screamed, not with static, but with the unmistakable sound of breathing, directly into the mic. The transmission ended with a crack, and a single word echoed through the cabin, spoken in the same tone the missing ranger once used. Foul. By dawn, the rain had thinned to a whisper, yet the forest seemed heavier, its silence loaded with memory. The investigators marked coordinates and began tracing the ridge where the tower's signal first rebounded. Their handheld receiver crackled with phantom bursts, each stronger than the last, guiding them deeper into uncharted brush. The air smelled of copper and pine sap. Every few steps came a low electrical hum from beneath the soil. It felt alive, pulsing through their boots. A toppled signpost, half buried in moss, bore the ranger station's insignia, though no map listed another post here. When the device blared a steady tone, Clara realized the signal wasn't coming from underground. It was moving with them, step for step. They followed the tone until it cut sharply, replaced by faint whistling, a tune neither recognized. Ahead, the trees opened into a clearing filled with fragments of old ranger equipment, a shattered compass, a rusted thermos, a notebook swollen with damp pages. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, repeating one line again and again. He hears through the pines. Kyle lifted the book, and as sunlight pierced the fog, his breath condensed into a visible cloud that seemed to linger too long, twisting in the air as if echoing the written words. Clara switched off the receiver. The forest, for a moment, exhaled. Back at the tower, they compared the notebook with old case files. The entries matched dates from the Ranger's final week, words recorded nowhere else. Each time Clara read a line aloud, the radio flickered as though in response. She stopped reading, and the light dimmed. Kyle tried again. It stayed dark. When she resumed, the tower's red beacon pulsed once, perfectly timed to her voice. It was no coincidence. The forest was listening, and only to her. A soft rustle echoed outside, branches swaying though the wind was dead still. Something unseen waited just beyond the tree line, mimicking the rhythm of her words. Night brought a new signal, slower, heavier, like distant footsteps transmitted through static. They traced the sound to a ridge overlooking the valley. The frequency monitor surged to life, displaying coordinates that didn't exist on any map. The ground here was soft, as if recently disturbed, and the air shimmered faintly. Clara crouched, brushing aside damp leaves to reveal the corner of a corroded metal tag stamped with the Ranger's ID number. The moment her fingers touched it, the receiver went silent, then emitted one sharp tone that hung in the air long after the device powered down. They returned to the cabin under a pale moon. The radio stood waiting, its dial already set to the same channel they'd been tracking all day. Neither had touched it. Clara reached for the switch but froze. A faint reflection shimmered in the window glass. A figure standing behind her, its outline too familiar. The reflection moved, though the room did not. Kyle turned, and the air temperature dropped in an instant. The radio flared bright white, releasing a single burst of static that sounded almost like laughter before collapsing into silence. Outside, the red beacon blinked once, then stayed lit. At dawn, a low vibration rippled through the ground, subtle enough to feel only when still. The trees swayed, though the air was motionless. From the tower came a hum like a deep, buried generator, but the power lines lay snapped and coiled in the dirt. Clara stood outside listening, her recorder trembling in her grip. Each pulse seemed to answer her heartbeat. Kyle scanned the tree line, eyes catching brief flickers of light moving between trunks. Not reflections, but steady, organized flashes. The rhythm matched the old distress code. They weren't signals from the radio anymore. The forest itself was speaking. As they advanced into the valley, the fog thickened until shapes lost meaning. Each sound bent and returned, distorted, their own voices thrown back with a half-second delay. Clara tested it, whispering a word. The echo replied not as repetition but as something slightly altered. The forest was rewriting speech, turning it into its own. The trail beneath them grew damp, soil shifting with faint electrical cracks. Kyle's compass spun wildly, refusing north. Somewhere deeper inside, a soft radio chime drifted through the trees, repeating 3 tones in sequence. It was the Ranger's call sign, transmitted without any device. They discovered an old Ranger checkpoint, long collapsed under vines. Its roof had caved inward, revealing cables that snaked from the soil to the frame. Not man-made wires, but roots coated in metallic sheen. Clara knelt and touched one. Warmth pulsed beneath the bark-like surface. The entire forest was conducting something. Kyle backed away as his radio began to bleed white noise without power. Beneath the static, a calm voice murmured the same phrase again and again. It wasn't a warning. It was a recording. Yet it addressed them directly, asking why they had come back. Night returned with unnatural speed. The air vibrated like a plucked string, and each vibration carried fragments of human speech. Brief, incomplete words floating on the wind. The forest no longer whispered. It spoke. The tower's red light began to blink in sync with these voices, forming a pulse that radiated outward. The mist around them turned faintly luminous, revealing faint outlines of paths no map ever marked. Claire traced one line on the ground, realizing it formed a perfect circle around the tower. At its center lay nothing but soil and silence, until the radio inside the cabin switched on by itself. Inside, the radio glowed white. The static was gone, replaced by a steady frequency that vibrated the walls. Clara leaned in close, hearing faint forest sounds transmitted through the speaker. Footsteps, branches cracking, breath against a microphone. Then the voice came again, calm and close. It spoke the coordinates of the valley, followed by a single word. Stay. The signal ended abruptly, but the hum didn't fade. It continued through the walls, through the floor, into the ground beneath them. Outside, the forest lights pulsed once more, and this time every tree responded in unison, as if breathing. The forest woke before sunrise. The air trembled with a low resonance that came not from wind or wildlife, but from deep within the soil. Each vibration carried direction, guiding them back toward the valley. Clara resisted, yet her compass needle now pointed toward the sound, unwavering. The path beneath their boots had changed, roots coiled like veins pulsing faint light. The same 3 radio tones echoed faintly ahead, but now they formed a rhythm too deliberate to be random. Kyle whispered that it felt like language. Clara didn't answer. She was already stepping toward the sound, eyes unfocused, hearing something beneath it. Her own voice repeating from somewhere unseen. They reached a clearing where the ground opened in shallow fissures. A faint electrical hum rose from below, merging with the rustle of leaves overhead. The pattern of light from the roots converged in the soil, forming a shape that resembled the ranger's call sign. When Clara spoke the letters aloud, the sound stopped instantly, replaced by absolute silence. Then, from the forest edge came a whisper, not through the air but inside her head. It was calm, familiar, and steady. The same cadence recorded on the last tape from 1998. The forest didn't just remember him. It was answering for him. The whisper guided them deeper until the trees grew too close for the sky to show. Every few steps, Clara caught glimpses of symbols etched into bark. Faint burns in the shape of sound waves. The deeper they went, the more those patterns pulsed in synchrony with her heartbeat. Kyle tried to record it, but the camera refused to focus. When he replayed the footage, the sound beneath the static wasn't the forest's hum anymore. It was a heartbeat, slow, rhythmic, human. The forest wasn't haunted by the ranger. It had become him. By dusk, the forest grew restless. The lights within the roots flickered erratically, casting strange, shifting shadows across the clearing. The radio in Clara's pack turned on by itself. No signal, just breathing, synchronized with the pulse beneath their feet. Then a faint message formed. He stayed to listen. The words looped, soft and unbroken. Kyle tried shutting it off, but the button sank like wet clay. Clara understood the meaning before she spoke it. The ranger hadn't vanished. He had merged with the signal that the forest had learned to carry. Every tree, every current of air, now spoke with his voice. That night, the forest grew brighter than the moon. The radio tower's beacon pulsed in unison with the glowing trees, forming one vast rhythm across the valley. Clara stood outside the cabin, frozen as the sound deepened into something almost melodic. A call. It wasn't meant for help. It was an invitation. Kyle called her name, but his voice echoed strangely, splitting into 2 layers, one his, one older. The forest repeated him in perfect unison, then fell silent. For a single breath, the air stood still. Then faintly, through the static of the wind, came a familiar voice whispering from every direction at once, "Stay and hear." The first sign came from town. Radios across the valley began to hum at the same frequency that once belonged to the ranger's call sign. No words, no static, just a low tone that resonated deep in the chest. Birds circled above the forest in silent formation, moving as though guided by unseen currents. Clara and Kyle watched from the tower as phone screens lit up on their own, displaying the same coordinates again and again. The forest no longer needed power lines or transmitters. It had found another way to speak, through every device that listened. The world was starting to tune in, and no one had turned the dial. They drove to the valley's edge where the old service road met the first houses. Every radio left in kitchens and cars played the same tone. Windows flickered faintly as if thin currents of light passed through their glass. When Clara stepped out, her phone vibrated in rhythmic pulses that matched the forest's heartbeat. On its screen appeared a single message without sender or timestamp. "You heard me once." Kyle tried to speak, but the static in his car drowned out every word. The signal wasn't calling for help anymore, it was calling them back. The following night, the signal spread further. People in nearby counties reported lights moving through their forests, always in patterns of 3. Flash, pause, flash. Recordings captured no sound, only silence interrupted by faint breathing. Clara replayed one clip and felt her skin prickle. The intervals between lights mirrored her own recorded heartbeat from the valley. The forest was using her rhythm as its pattern. She looked at Kyle. He already knew what that meant. The signal wasn't expanding randomly. It was evolving, using what it had learned from them to reach further. By midnight, the hum infiltrated every device they owned. Even the recorder without batteries came alive, spinning its reels backward, whispering fragments of the ranger's final transmission. Clara realized the voice was changing, still his tone, but threaded with echoes of her own speech. The forest had merged their signals. Kyle turned off the main breaker, yet the lights continued to flicker in perfect rhythm with the unseen pulse. From the hills, the red glow of the tower brightened once more, no longer pulsing. It burned steady, like a single open eye. Morning came, but daylight felt false. The sky tinted faint red, the air humming with faint vibration. Every radio in town broadcast a perfect unified signal, now one that carried no words but evoked clear intent. Presence. Clara and Kyle stood at the valley ridge, listening as the sound rolled through the air like a wave. For a moment, the forest seemed to breathe in sync with the clouds above. Then faintly from every speaker and tree alike came the same soft whisper, "I never left." The world didn't just hear the forest anymore, it understood it. The valley lay utterly still. The red light of the tower no longer pulsed. It glowed steady, quiet, eternal. The air shimmered faintly, bending the morning sun into soft halos. Clara felt her radio vibrate, though it wasn't switched on. The tone it emitted was gentle, rising and falling like breathing. Kyle stood beside her, head tilted as if listening to a voice just beneath hearing. The sound grew warmer, fuller, resolving into layers, human tones woven through wind and leaves. The forest wasn't echoing anymore. It was speaking in harmony, a living frequency that filled the valley with one emotion too vast to name: remembrance. They walked to the cabin, each step sensing to the subtle vibration beneath the ground. Inside, every device had stopped responding, yet the walls hummed faintly, resonating as though made of wood and wire alike. Clara placed her recorder on the desk. Without power, it clicked and began to play a message. Her own voice layered beneath a deeper one. The two blended seamlessly, forming a single phrase: "We listen together." The air thickened, light bending softly around her hands. It felt like standing within someone else's memory, one that was offering her a place within it. Outside, the forest shimmered. Every branch carried fine strands of light that pulsed like veins, connecting the trees in slow rhythm. Kyle reached toward one and felt a warmth like human skin. Beneath the glow, faint images formed, silhouettes of the ranger moving through fog, repeating the same motion of raising a radio to his lips. Each flicker was a memory, replaying endlessly. Clara realized the forest was storing moments, keeping them alive, refusing decay. When she whispered the ranger's name, every tree responded in gentle vibration, and his voice answered softly through the leaves. Still here. As evening fell, a deep calm settled over the valley. The light faded from red to soft amber, and the hum inside the earth slowed to a steady rhythm. The tower no longer stood apart from the trees. Its metal frame was covered in vines that glowed faintly, merging steel and bark into one shape. Clara realized the signal had completed its purpose. It wasn't a warning or a cry. It was a reunion. The forest had absorbed the man who once guarded it, keeping his vigilance eternal. She lowered her radio to the ground, knowing it would never fall silent again. It would breathe with the woods forever. Night returned without fear. The signal, once confined to static and machines, had become the forest's natural rhythm, carried by wind, echoed by rivers, remembered in soil. Clara stood on the ridge one last time, watching the valley shimmer beneath the stars. The radio in her hand glowed faintly, then dimmed as if in farewell. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound was no longer a voice, not even a tone, but the pulse of a living place that remembered everything it had ever lost. The ranger hadn't gone missing after all. He had simply learned how to stay. The valley was quiet again. The forest slept beneath a silver mist, and the tower's light had faded to a steady ember. Claire and Kyle waited beside the cabin as dawn gathered behind the trees. No hum, no pulse, no whisper. Only the gentle creak of branches in the wind. Yet even in silence, something remained. The air carried a faint vibration, softer than breath, just enough to remind them that the signal hadn't vanished. It had only gone deeper. Kyle turned the radio's dial once more. It stayed dead, but from the forest came a soundless echo, an invisible response, like a held note, still resonating long after the instrument is gone. They hiked down the ridge without speaking. Each turn of the path felt unfamiliar, though they had walked it 100 times. The landscape itself seemed rearranged. Trees in new alignments, stones freshly overturned. At the trail's edge, Clara paused. Her phone vibrated once, though it had no signal. When she checked the screen, it displayed a single number, the ranger's old frequency. The moment she looked up, a faint reflection shimmered in the distance, the tower's red light flickering once, far beyond where it should have been visible. Then it vanished, leaving only sky and wind. Back in town, static filled every channel for exactly 1 minute at noon. No one noticed at first, just background noise. But the few who listened claimed to hear a voice behind it, soft and indistinct, repeating coordinates that led to nowhere. Clara stood outside the ranger office, radio pressed to her ear, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. The voice faded, replaced by faint wind, but the tone felt familiar, almost human. She smiled faintly, not in comfort but in understanding. Some signals weren't meant to be found. They simply needed to be heard once more. That evening, the radio in the abandoned tower flickered again. No one was there to see it. The light pulsed once, twice, then steadied. A faint tone rolled through the forest like a sigh, brushing the treetops and scattering a flock of birds. The sound carried beyond the valley, blending into the wind. For those listening on certain forgotten frequencies, the static cleared just long enough to hear a phrase in a calm, steady voice, one that seemed older than any recording. Still on watch. Then the signal vanished, leaving only the hum of the world returning to quiet. Days passed, and the forest returned to silence. Yet, on some nights when wind crossed the valley in just the right direction, the sound of faint static drifted between the trees. Rhythmic, patient, and alive. The tower's light no longer shone, but its echo lingered in every radio left nearby, even those without power. Clara sometimes thought she heard words forming within that hush, Too quiet to record, but clear enough to understand. The signal wasn't lost, and neither was he. Somewhere in the deep woods, the forest was still listening.